Could you please buy our puppy? A small girl murmured, unaware she was speaking to the CEO who had terminated her mother's employment just last month. Ethan Bradley, the 36-year-old newly minted CEO, emerged from his polished black car into the brisk air of a late Friday afternoon. A biting wind snuck past his collar, prompting him to pull his coat tighter as he glanced at his phone. The screen was a chaotic collage of unread emails, financial spreadsheets, and calendar reminders. He had just finished a grueling call with the board, their sharp voices echoing in his mind, demanding more aggressive cost-cutting, swifter layoffs, and higher profits with less tolerance for delays. They told him to trim the excess, to make the hard calls. He had complied, projecting an agreement that masked an internal resistance. A new restructuring memo was waiting in his inbox, another name he would be forced to approve. As he moved toward the gleaming glass entrance of the corporate tower, a delicate but distinct voice called out from the sidewalk. "Could you please buy our puppy?" He paused and looked over. A little girl was standing on the corner by the bus stop, partially obscured by a handmade cardboard sign. She looked to be no older than 5. Her coat, a shade of bubblegum pink, was worn and faded, with sleeves that hung too long and were frayed at the cuffs. Braids of dark hair escaped from beneath her knitted hat. In her small arms, she cradled a tiny, cream-colored puppy swaddled in a scarf. Next to her, the sign announced in shaky, painted letters, "Our puppy for sale. Please help us." Ethan found himself walking toward her, not entirely sure why. The little girl looked up at him with serious blue eyes that held no hint of pleading. She gently offered the puppy forward. "His name is Muffin," she explained quietly. "My mommy said if someone buys him, we can get her medicine and some groceries." Ethan just stared, rendered speechless by her composure. There were no tears, no whimpering, only a quiet resolve. It was the most grown-up thing he had heard all day. He reached for his wallet and extracted a crisp bill. Before he could offer it, the girl shook her head. "I can't just take your money if you don't take Muffin," she stated with gravity. "That's how it works." A peculiar tightness gripped Ethan's chest. He knelt down, extending his hands. Muffin sniffed him cautiously before snuggling into his coat with a faint whimper. Ethan could feel the puppy's little heart beating rapidly. The girl moved a bit closer, and for a fleeting second, their faces were just inches apart. As their eyes met, he saw a faded patch on the sleeve of her coat, a stitched emblem that read, "Grow and Care." It was the same volunteer program his company had championed for years, the very one he had defunded 2 quarters ago to reduce overhead. He froze. He recalled signing the order. It had felt like a simple numbers game at the time, a footnote in a budget report. Now, that decision stared back at him in the form of a little girl selling her dog for medicine. "I will take very good care of him," he managed to say. Her expression relaxed slightly. She gave him a folded piece of the cardboard sign. "You have to sign here, so I know it's a real deal." He blinked, retrieved the pen from his coat, and signed his name beneath her printed words. He returned the makeshift contract and held Muffin as carefully as he could. Just then, a woman's voice, soft but urgent, called out, "Zuri." He turned to see a black woman walking quickly in their direction. She had tired features, her dark hair pulled back, and she wore a thin gray coat. Though her posture suggested exhaustion, her pace was determined. She reached the girl, Zuri, pulling her into a tight embrace before her eyes settled on Ethan. She looked at Muffin in his arms and hesitated. "Thank you for buying him," she said softly, her gaze meeting his. "My daughter. She adores that dog. Please, just be good to him. I promise I'll come back for him when I can. I want to buy him back." She offered no other explanation and asked for no names. With a single nod, she took Zuri's hand and walked away, her shoulders set rigidly against the wind. Ethan remained there for a long moment. He held Muffin in one arm and, in the other hand, a cardboard signature and an unspoken burden. He turned back toward his office building, but the world felt different now, shifted just enough to change everything. He had arrived at work focused on figures. Now, all he could picture was a little girl in a pink coat and a mother who vowed to return for the one thing she loved. Ethan sat in his car with the engine running, staring blankly at the dashboard. The faint image of the logo on the little girl's coat was seared into his mind. Grow and Care, a program established to support employee families in distress. It was once a proud symbol of the company's ethos, now just a line item he had personally slashed. He dismissed it as non-essential during a quarterly review. Now, it had a face, a small, determined one with solemn blue eyes and a pink jacket. Back in his office, Ethan bypassed his assistant and went directly into his corner suite, closing the door behind him. He didn't bother to remove his coat. He sat at his massive desk, opened his laptop, and logged into the company's HR portal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up records from the most recent wave of layoffs, focusing on the customer service department. And there it was. Janelle Harper, 31, employment terminated last month. The reason cited was a failure to follow proper escalation procedures during a system outage, which led to a temporary service disruption and client complaints. The recommendation came from Travis Benton, the head of operations, and the final signatory was Ethan Bradley, CEO. His own name. He stared at it for a long, uncomfortable moment. He remembered the meeting where Travis presented charts and loss estimates. No one had mentioned Janelle's stellar past performance or offered any defense. It was swift, sterile, and declared necessary. But now, something felt deeply wrong. He opened another browser window and navigated to the customer feedback archives, filtering for Janelle Harper's name. Page after page of commendations appeared. Janelle was the only person who stayed on the line with me while my daughter was in the hospital. Please commend Janelle for her extraordinary patience. She completely turned my negative experience around. She deserves a promotion. Her average satisfaction score was 49 out of 5. He leaned back, the air catching in his throat. None of this information had been included in the termination summary. There was no context, no balance, only performance charts with damning red ink. No one had mentioned she was one of their most cherished team members. He clicked into the benefits database. Janelle had declined COBRA coverage, filed no unemployment claim, and requested no health reimbursement. She had accepted her termination and simply disappeared. That told him something else about her character, pride, or perhaps sheer exhaustion. Digging further, he accessed the internal dashboard that tracked customer service metrics. He set the date range to the period after Janelle's departure. A stark red bar materialized on the screen. Overall satisfaction had plunged by 117%. A coincidence? Perhaps, but his gut screamed otherwise. Then came the most difficult search. He pulled up her employee profile picture. There she was, a black woman with kind, though weary, eyes and a gentle smile. His chest constricted. It was Zuri's mother, the woman who had appeared just hours ago, thanking him quietly and vowing to return for her puppy. He recalled how she had clutched her daughter, the slight pause before she spoke. She hadn't begged, only made a single request: take care of Muffin. It was as if that was the last shred of dignity she could afford to protect. He opened her complete file. It contained years of glowing performance reviews, awards, emails from grateful clients, and notes from previous supervisors. One comment read, "Janelle is the quiet heart of this team. She holds us all together." Why hadn't he seen any of this? Why wasn't it presented to him? A bitter realization dawned. It hadn't suited the narrative. When Travis advocated for cuts, anyone who prioritized people over process was branded inefficient. Ethan's jaw tightened. He ran a hand over his face, his mind racing. If Janelle was truly at fault, why was her file filled with praise? Why did customers adore her? Why was she so silent after being let go? Maybe she had been set up. Maybe the blame was just convenient. And maybe, he acknowledged with chilling clarity, he had failed her completely. He opened a new document and began typing. He had signed away someone's livelihood, a woman raising a daughter who was now standing in the cold, trying to sell her best friend for a bottle of medicine. The more he read, the more undeniable the truth became. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. He had to learn more. He had to face the consequences of a decision that, until that morning, was just a name on a screen. Ethan returned to the supermarket, holding Muffin securely in a soft carrier that was draped with his coat. In his other hand, he carried a small bag of puppy food. He had decided it was time to find Zuri, not to formalize the adoption, but to return Muffin along with enough food for a week. The puppy belonged at home, not in his custody. He walked through the automatic doors, his eyes scanning the entrance for the little girl in the pink coat. Zuri was still there, but she was no longer holding her for sale sign. Instead, she stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, handing out flyers to shoppers. They were pink, advertising that her mother was looking for work. He watched her from a distance for a moment before she spotted him. A soft whine from Muffin inside the carrier confirmed her recognition. Her eyes grew wide with a mixture of shock and relief. "You're the man who bought Muffin yesterday," she said softly, as if recalling a distant dream. He knelt down and gently unzipped the carrier. Muffin scrambled out and trotted toward her, his tail giving a hesitant wag. "Muffin remembers you," Ethan said gently. "He told me he wanted to come back. He misses you, Zuri. This is his food. You need to take care of him now, all right?" He held out the bag of kibble. The sincerity in his voice seemed to catch her off guard. Zuri scooped Muffin in her arms, her lower lip trembling. Without a word, she handed Ethan one of the flyers from her small pile. It was a plea for employment assistance. "My mother is a very good worker, but she can't find a job. Please help her so our family can be okay." The handwriting was neat but delicate, mirroring the fragile hope behind the words. He read it carefully. "Your mother is very good." It wasn't a desperate plea, just a simple statement of fact. He felt the profound weight of that sentiment. She had no understanding of corporate politics or legal justifications. She only knew her mother was worthy of more, and she was using her small power to make it happen. He reached into his coat for a pen and a business card. On the back, he wrote, "I will try," and pressed it into her hand. She held it with a look of awe, as if it were a magical object. A gust of wind swirled near the entrance. He lowered his voice. "Your mother is very lucky to have a daughter like you." She nodded, blinking back tears as she hugged Muffin and the bag of food to her chest. "He's your puppy. He belongs with you," he repeated, "until things get better." He then looked closer at the flyer she had made. It listed her mother's name, Janelle Harper. Ethan's breath hitched. Seeing the name that had tormented him for the past day, he felt the full, crushing weight of his responsibility. Can I meet your mom?" he asked quietly. Zuri hesitated, glancing from Muffin's happy face to Ethan's, then took a step back while keeping a firm hold on the puppy. She led him by the hand, navigating through shoppers toward a small corridor at the side of the building. When they arrived at a simple door marked Suite 5C, she knocked gently and ushered him inside. The space was sparse, containing a low table, a few mismatched chairs, a pile of cleaning supplies in one corner, and a woman sitting on a small sofa. Her dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes were red-rimmed, as if from crying. She hugged Zuri tightly as she entered, then her gaze fell on Ethan standing in the doorway with a bag of puppy food. Zuri made the introduction softly. "Mom, this is the man who bought Muffin to keep him safe," she added. "He said Muffin remembers me." The woman lifted her eyes to Ethan, her expression guarded as she carefully took the puppy into her arms. Ethan didn't need to introduce himself. The look of recognition on her face told him she knew exactly who he was. "You're Ethan Bradley," she stated, her voice flat. The CO, he gave a slight nod. "Yes, I am." She stared at him for a long moment, then opened the door just enough to stand firmly in the opening, her hand gripping the edge. "So," she said, her tone cold and precise, "you've come to witness the consequences of your signature firsthand." Ethan swallowed, caught off guard not by her bitterness, but by the dignity with which she delivered it. She didn't raise her voice or make accusations. She simply stood there, her eyes weary, one hand on her daughter's shoulder, as if to shield Zuri from an unseen threat. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice soft. "And to listen, if you'll allow me." Janelle shook her head, not in anger, but with the weary resignation of someone bracing against a relentless storm. "You read a report," she said, "and you chose to believe it." Ethan stepped back slightly. "I did," he admitted, "and I failed to ask the right questions." "You failed to ask any questions," she corrected, her voice tightening. "No one asked for my side of the story." No one asked why a system failed or what I did to try and mitigate it. They just needed a scapegoat, and there was no one in that room to speak for me. Ethan lowered his gaze. I am sorry. I know that's not enough, but I'm here because I've realized, far too late, that my signature took more than just your job. Janelle took a deep, shuddering breath, blinking hard. Zuri tugged at her mother's sleeve, and Janelle pulled her closer instinctively. I don't need your pity, Janelle said finally, her voice barely a whisper. I don't need apologies whispered on my doorstep. I needed someone in that boardroom to look beyond the spreadsheets and the deadlines and the pressure and see the person who had given everything to that company. A tense silence hung in the air. Then Ethan, without another word, reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, worn leather notebook. He handed it to her. Janelle opened it with caution. Inside were handwritten notes, thank you letters from customers, names, stories, and small tokens of appreciation she had once received and carefully preserved. Her own notes were in the margins, reminders, follow-ups, a customer's birthday. You kept this? She asked, her brow furrowed in confusion. It was in your old desk, he explained. They were about to throw it out during the office clean-out. I saw your name on it, and I couldn't let them discard it. She didn't respond at first, just stood there, flipping a page with trembling fingers. I didn't come here to fix everything, Ethan said quietly. I know I can't erase what happened, but I can start by listening now. I can start trying to mend what I helped to break. Janelle placed the notebook on a small table. She wrapped both arms around Zuri, pulling her in. Her expression softened, but only marginally. Do you know what hurts the most? She said, her voice cracking slightly. It isn't losing the income. It's having to wake up every single morning and convince my daughter that I didn't do anything wrong, that her mommy isn't broken. Ethan's throat felt tight. You are not broken. She looked at him with a tired, searching expression. You still believe words can fix this? No, he said, but actions might. Janelle finally stepped back from the doorway. Then come back tomorrow, she said, her tone not unkind but firm. But don't come back to talk. Come back with a real reason. I will, Ethan promised. She nodded once, then started to close the door. Just before it latched, her voice came through again, softer this time. And bring the same honesty you brought with you tonight. The door clicked shut. Ethan stood on the porch in silence for a long time. Then he turned and walked to his car, carrying the weight of a woman's dignity and the profound responsibility to do something more than just regret. Ethan was reviewing quarterly feedback reports when his assistant knocked on his office door. Mr. Bradley, there's a little girl here to see you. She says her name is Zuri, and she has a puppy with her. Ethan's pen stopped moving. Send her in, he said, already getting to his feet. The door swung open, and in walked Zuri, her dark hair in a slightly messy ponytail, her cheeks rosy from the walk, and her arms cradling Muffin as if he were made of precious china. Behind her, Janelle stood silently in the hallway, hesitating just outside the office. She offered Ethan a brief, guarded nod. Zuri marched confidently to his desk, her steps filled with purpose. Muffin wanted to come visit, she announced seriously. He missed you, but I think he really wanted to say thank you. Ethan managed a gentle smile. Thank me? I should be the one thanking him. Zuri reached in her backpack and retrieved a small, worn cardboard box tied with a pink ribbon. She placed it carefully beside Muffin on Ethan's desk. This is for you, she said. My mom didn't know I was bringing it, but I thought you should have it. Ethan's gaze moved from the box to the girl, and then to Janelle, who had now stepped halfway into the room, her expression difficult to read. May I open it? He asked. Zuri nodded. Inside the box were several old photographs showing Janelle at company gatherings, surrounded by smiling colleagues and clients. In one photo, she was holding a handmade card from a child, which read in colorful crayon, Ms. Janelle is the bestest helper ever. Tucked underneath the pictures was a single folded note. Ethan opened it. The handwriting was elegant but slightly faded. Janelle, thank you for staying late to help me locate my lost shipment. You didn't have to, but you did, and it meant everything to me. You're not just an employee. You're the reason I'm still a loyal customer. God bless you, Ethan swallowed hard. I found those in my mom's drawer, Zuri said quietly. I thought maybe you forgot who she was, so I wanted to remind you. Janelle looked as though she wanted the floor to open up and swallow her whole. Zuri, she whispered, mortified. But Ethan shook his head. No, he said, his voice thick with emotion. She did exactly the right thing. He sat down slowly, holding the note in both hands. Its weight, more significant than any financial report or executive summary, settled heavily in his chest. She kept every single one of these, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. She saved them because they mattered, Zuri explained. And she thought she mattered too. Before a profound silence filled the room, one that neither Ethan nor Janelle felt the need to break. Muffin let out a little yawn and curled up on a corner of the desk, as if he owned the place. Then Zuri added softly, I think Muffin brought you to our house because my mommy deserves to be loved again. Janelle's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she quickly turned away, trying to hide her face. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his desk. He's a very smart dog, Zuri smiled, then gently kissed Muffin's head. I told him he was a good boy. Ethan looked at Janelle. He really saw her. She still stood with her arms crossed, defensive, her shoulders tight from carrying the world's burdens for too long. But beneath that guarded exterior was a woman who had given so much of herself and paid the price in silence. I don't know what happens from here, Ethan said, his voice low and sincere. But I know that I can't look away anymore. Janelle finally met his gaze. For the first time since he had shown up at her door, she didn't look away. Zuri reached for her mother's hand. Can we go home now, Mama? Janelle nodded. Yes, sweetie. As they turned to leave, Ethan called out gently, Wait. He picked up the small box again and held it out toward Janelle. I'd like to keep this just for a little while. Janelle hesitated for a moment, then gave a slight nod. Ethan watched them leave his office, Zuri skipping ahead and Muffin's tail wagging behind her. He sat there alone, holding a box full of forgotten kindness and a heart that was slowly remembering what it felt like to care. The boardroom felt unusually cold that morning, and it had nothing to do with the thermostat. Ethan stood at the head of the long glass table, his hands braced on its polished surface, as he faced a semicircle of stern, skeptical executives. I am proposing that we reinstate Janelle Harper, he announced, his voice clear and steady. Not to her former role, but to a new position, Senior Advisor for Customer Experience. It's a role created specifically for her strengths. A low murmur spread through the room. One of the senior board members leaned in. You're talking about the woman who was terminated last month for failing to handle a system-wide failure that cost us 4 major accounts. Ethan nodded. The very same one, but I've investigated further. She didn't fail. She was made the scapegoat. And that mistake cost us far more than clients. It cost us our integrity. That's a dangerous path. Ethan, another director cautioned. If we start bringing back former employees because someone feels guilty, we're inviting chaos. How will we explain this to the rest of the staff? Ethan took a steadying breath. With the truth. We explained that this company values competence, loyalty, and humanity. And we explained that when we are wrong, we make it right. A woman from Human Resources frowned. Even if you're correct about her case, the precedent it sets is risky. It could undermine our entire termination protocol. Ethan began to pace slowly around the table. Do you know what's happened to our customer satisfaction ratings since Janelle left? They've dropped by nearly 12%. That isn't a statistical dip. It's a clear message. He clicked a remote. The large screen behind him came to life, displaying charts, feedback reports, and glowing testimonials. A clear pattern had emerged, one he could no longer deny. She wasn't just answering calls, Ethan continued. She was the anchor of her team. She was the reason we retained loyal customers through multiple price increases. She made people feel valued. Another board member shook his head. This sounds personal to you. It is personal, Ethan affirmed, meeting his gaze directly. Because I signed off on her termination without asking a single critical question. I rubber-stamped a report instead of trying to understand the person behind it. I made it impersonal, and that was my mistake. A long, tense silence followed. Finally, someone from the far end of the table spoke up, his arms crossed defiantly. And now you want us to overturn a formal decision based on what? A gut feeling? No, Ethan said evenly. Based on facts. Because we are not a stronger company without her. And because the future we want to build requires more people like her, not fewer. His voice gained strength, resonating through the room. We need more people like Janelle Harper, not less. We need individuals who care enough to stay late, to take calls on their days off, to remember that behind every complaint is a human being who put their trust in us. Janelle Harper isn't a liability, he concluded. She represents the very part of this company we should be proudest of. The silence that followed was thick and awkward. Then the objections began. You can't operate a business on sentiment. Rules and processes matter. This sets a terrible example for every manager in the company. Ethan listened to each protest without interruption. He let them speak. When they were finished, he said quietly but with unshakable resolve, "That's why I'm not asking you to fund her return. I will." Every head in the room turned toward him. "I'm allocating a portion of my CEO discretionary fund to cover her salary, her training, and the establishment of this new advisory role. It will not affect any operational budgets. I am taking full responsibility." A younger board member looked stunned. "You do that?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, because true leadership isn't about being infallible. It's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and the conviction to fix it." Another long silence descended, until a quiet, hesitant voice asked, "And what if it works?" A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "Then we all win." There's no round of applause, no celebratory handshakes, just a quiet, grudging acceptance that a fundamental shift had just occurred in that room. A shift not just in policy, but in principle. He left the meeting with nothing but a quiet determination in his chest and a name he could finally say with pride. Janelle Harper, Senior Advisor for Customer Experience. A role made for someone who had never stopped caring, even when her company had. Janelle began her new job with a sense of cautious optimism. The title, Senior Advisor for Customer Experience, was impressive, but it was the underlying respect that truly meant something. For the first time in months, she walked into an office where she wasn't viewed as a problem to be solved. Her small workspace had a window overlooking the street, and on her desk was a nameplate Ethan had specially ordered. Janelle Harper, voice of the customer. Ethan made a point of visiting her often, not as her boss, but as someone genuinely seeking to understand. Sometimes he would simply pop his head in and ask, "Are you having a good day?" The simplicity of that question began to unravel a knot of tension that had been lodged in Janelle's chest for far too long. It wasn't about performance metrics or data points. It was about her as a person. They fell into a routine of having lunch together once a week, usually on Thursdays. Janelle would bring homemade meals, often leftovers of Zuri's favorite dishes. Ethan, who was accustomed to eating cold sandwiches at his desk, found himself looking forward to her warm casseroles and seasoned rice. One afternoon, he remarked, "This is the first real lunch I've actually sat down and finished in years." And he smiled in a boyish way she was finding increasingly difficult to resist. One evening, Janelle accidentally left her tote bag in the office break room. Ethan found it and, intending only to return it to her desk, noticed a small notebook sticking out. His curiosity won. Inside, he found handwritten notes from customers, thank you cards, and little scribbled messages of gratitude, some dating back several years. One read, "Janelle, thank you for treating me like a person, not a problem. You made a terrible day bearable." Ethan read each word like a sacred confession, then gently closed the notebook and placed it back on her desk without a word. Later that week, he saw her wrestling with a squeaky office chair. "Let me have a look at that," he offered. Before she could object, Ethan was on his knees beside the chair, expertly examining its wheels and armrests. "Summer job during college," he explained with a smile. "My dad taught me how to fix things, woodwork, furniture, small engines. He always said every CEO should know how to build a chair before he presides over a boardroom." Janelle watched with a small smile as he methodically tightened the screws. The chair never squeaked again. Together, they also started rewriting company policies, creating new guidelines that would protect single parents, offer emotional support during downsizing and create pathways for second chances. Why are you so dedicated to this? Ethan asked one night as they worked late. Janelle answered softly, because I know what it feels like to sit alone at your kitchen table, crying, trying to figure out how to explain hunger to a child without using the word poor. No one should ever have to feel that powerless. Then came the company's Bring Your Inspiration to Work Day. Ethan insisted that Zuri be a part of it. Janelle was hesitant, but Zuri arrived beaming with pride, her hair tied up with a pink ribbon and Muffin trotting alongside her in a tiny red bandana. That afternoon, the staff gathered as employees shared stories of their heroes. Zuri stood nervously before the crowd, clutching a drawing she had made of her family. "My mom is my hero," she said in a small, clear voice. Because even when people were mean to her, she was always kind. Even when we had to sell Muffin, she told me we were still lucky because we had each other. She glanced at Ethan, then back at her mother. And then Muffin came back, and now Mommy smiles again. I don't know if puppies have magic, but ever since we met you, Mommy and Muffin and me, we all laugh a lot more. The room was completely silent for a moment. Then a wave of quiet, heartfelt applause broke out. Ethan blinked rapidly, trying to conceal the moisture in his eyes. Janelle held Zuri close, her heart overflowing. This was no longer just about getting a job back. It was about rebuilding a life, about weaving kindness back into the fabric of a place where cold policy had once reigned. And somewhere between the shared meals, the fixed chairs, and the whispered words of gratitude, something deeper was taking root, something Janelle was almost ready to believe in again. It was a cool Saturday evening as Ethan strolled through the park with Janelle and Zuri. Muffin trotted happily ahead of them, his tail a blur of excitement. Zuri skipped between the two adults, holding her mother's hand in one of hers. "Muffin has a baby brother now," she giggled. "Maybe we can sell that one too, huh?" Janelle blushed and let out a soft laugh. She still thinks that people who buy puppies are destined to fall in love with the person who sells them, she said, glancing over at Ethan. He paused beneath the gentle glow of a park lamp. "I may not know much about puppies," he said, his smile warm and genuine, "but I know for a fact I chose the right woman." His voice was steady and sincere. They walked on in a comfortable quiet. As they reached the steps to Janelle's apartment, Ethan hesitated. Janelle turned to him, her keys in her hand. "I don't know if I'm the kind of person Zuri can count on yet," he admitted with raw honesty. "But I really want to try, if you'll let me." Janelle's expression softened, but her voice trembled slightly. "I am scared, Ethan. Zuri is already so attached to you. If this doesn't work out, I understand," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. Just give me a chance." She paused for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Come on in. You're already home, anyway." The next morning, Ethan returned with a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver bracelet, clearly an heirloom, polished to a soft shine. He handed it to Janelle. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She had the word courage engraved on the inside. She used to tell me, if you ever find someone who makes you want to be a better man, don't you dare let them go. That's what you and Zuri have done for me." Janelle held the delicate bracelet in her palm. "You just keep surprising me. And one more thing," Ethan added. He knelt beside Muffin and clipped a new, shiny tag to his collar. Janelle leaned in to read the single word engraved on it. "Belongs," she whispered. Ethan took her hands in his. "It's what you've always deserved," he said softly. "You just forgot for a little while." That afternoon, they drove out to a quiet meadow on the edge of the city. Wildflowers dotted the landscape, and warm sunlight bathed the grass. Zuri's laughter filled the air as she ran through the field, with Muffin bounding joyfully at her heels. Watching her daughter, Janelle turned to Ethan. "She hasn't smiled like this in such a long time." He squeezed her hand. "We're building something that's going to last." Zuri ran back to them, her face flushed and beaming, and leaned against Ethan. She looked up at him and whispered, "This time, Mommy doesn't lose her job again, right?" Ethan kissed her on the forehead. "Not this time, sweetheart. Not ever again." As the sun began its descent, casting a golden hue across the field, Ethan looked at Janelle. Her eyes met his, and he saw not fear, but a boundless hope. And in that moment, Everything made perfect sense. The puppy, the pink coat, the second chance. It had all begun with a little girl's whispered plea, "Could you please buy our puppy?" And it had ended here, with three hearts finally understanding where they belonged. Sometimes, the smallest voices speak the most profound truths. A little girl selling her puppy didn't just capture a man's heart. She reminded him what kind of leader and what kind of human being he truly wanted to be.